Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our presentation on the European Security Risk and Management Guidelines for Financial Institutions. My name is Leanne de Boer, and today we are going to be welcoming Cyril Goulin, who will be speaking to us about these challenges. During the presentation, we ask you to please send us any questions that you may have in the question or chat box, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation. Also, so that you know, we will be sending out an email to all of you who are in attendance today at the end of this, which will have a recording of the webinar in it, so you will be getting that. So if everybody's ready, let's get started. So today, what are we going to talk about? Actually, what's Cyril going to talk about? We are going to look at what the information and communication technology security guidelines are. That will be our first step. Then we're going to share with you a baseline for logical security. Our focus is going to be on access recertification, why, what, and how to do it. Then we'll walk you through a case study. And like I mentioned, at the very end, we're going to take your questions and answer them for you. So now let's welcome Cyril Goulin to the presentation, and he can start it off for us.
Hello, thank you very much, Leanne. And welcome everyone. I am very glad to be with you this afternoon and spend the next 45 minutes talking about the EBA guidelines, and especially, as Leanne said, focus on the logical security aspects of those guidelines. When I say guidelines, I'm actually referring to two sets of guidelines. One is for the banking sector, EBA issued, and the second one is more for the insurance business, issued by the EIOPA. So let's have a short look and history of those guidelines. Actually, it all comes from a first set of guidelines that were supporting document to the PSD2 EU directive for payment service providers, which was really focused at high-level security measures for the payment service providers, for the PSPs. And EBA realized that a broader range of financial institutions actually needed to have this baseline of security measures, and they worked on expanding the guidelines to embrace this broader range of institutions. So not only the PSPs, but also credit institutions, including also the investment firms, etc., the ECB, European Central Bank, and the other national central banks. It's applicable from June 30th in 2020, so that's 18 months from now, and those new guidelines repealed the 2017 guidelines. We'll see that there's a small chapter dedicated to payment service providers in the new 2019 guidelines. What is interesting is the choice of terms. When you hear about guidelines, you understand that it's a guide, it's guiding you towards some objectives. But if we look more deeply into the document and the introduction of the document, it clearly says that competent authorities and financial institutions must make every effort to comply with the guidelines. So it's a little more than just a guide. It's a guide that you have to follow, basically. Regarding the EIOPA guidelines, I won't refer specifically to those guidelines because they are very, 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 very similar to the EBA guideline, to the level that the logical security chapter is really a copy-paste from the EBA guidelines, and that's on purpose. That's to avoid inconsistencies between the banking and insurance sectors. So it's a choice from the EIOPA to be a to follow the same guidelines as the EBA. They provide some other insight as to the goals of those guidelines. They also say that the goal is to provide clarification and transparency and get a minimum expected information and cybersecurity capability. So it's the goal of having a security baseline that is applicable to all the institutions. They also talk about the need of having an independent and objective control function that is segregated from ICT operations. That's again obviously the best practice, but it's good to remember everyone of this need to have a control function that is separated from the IT operations, basically. So the main sections of the guidelines, and I'll go very quickly because the goal is really to have a focus on information security today. If you look at the different chapters, governance, risk management framework, operations, change management, business continuity, etc., you realize that obviously those guidelines are building on existing frameworks and standards that are already applicable to or used in a number of your organizations, such as COBIT, such as ISO 27K, such as the IT General Controls or COSO for institutions in the US. It's interesting to mention the proportionality chapter, which is really a very short introduction at the beginning of the document, which explains basically that although those guidelines are to be enforced, you have to follow them, but you may also adapt the measures and the decisions you make to the stakes of your organization. So depending on your business, depending on the size of your organization, etc., there's a need of proportionality of the measures with the risks and with what is at stake. So that shows that there's a way to somehow tune the level of requirements based on this proportionality principle. Obviously, we're going to focus on information security. So what is in the information security chapter of those guidelines? There are actually 7 sections, and again, you'll see something that is very common. It covers all the sections of the organizational security principles, basically. So the need for an information security policy, cover the logical and physical security, operation security, monitoring, testing, training. So it's again very broad. We could see here nonetheless that it does not specifically intend to deal with cyber threats. What I'm referring to is that you won't find things like the organization needs to implement an intrusion detection mechanism, or need to fight for malwares, or have an antivirus in place. That's not this kind of document. We're really talking about a set of very general principles, security principles that have to be tackled in your organization. So again,
so
today.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I thought you were going to get a little bit more into logical security piece for us as we move on.
Yes, absolutely, Leon. That's the case. We're going to look at logical security again with this mindset that we are talking about the minimum expected requirements around logical security, and again 7 basic principles. So a very concise yet pretty comprehensive baseline of security principles. Here we are. At the top of the list here, the 3 pillars of logical security or logical access management. need to know list privilege and segregation of duties. I'm pretty sure you are familiar with those three principles. Need to know really means that you need to make sure that there's an adequation between the job function, the responsibilities of users, and the actual level of authorizations that they have on the systems, so that the level of authorizations is just enough for them to perform their job. List privilege means obviously again that we're going to tune the access to the minimum. So you don't need to be an admin if you only need read access to a system, basically. And segregation of duties principles mean that some authorizations, some permissions are incompatible because they can lead to fraud risk or cyber threats, etc. And one has to fight those. So one has to document the situations where different access permissions are incompatible and make sure that those conflicts don't happen in real life. User accountability is the principle under which you want to make sure that all accounts are assigned to actual people, actual users, real life persons. So the guideline specifically says that you have to fight against generic or shared accounts, for instance. Authentication methods covers the need for stronger authentication methods or systems, two-factor authentication or else, those sort of things. So we're talking about more technological principles of technological means. Access management is all the process-related principle to make sure that you appropriately manage the provisioning and deprovisioning of access in a timely manner. So you grant new access to new users, but you're also able to revoke the access of a user who's leaving the organization or maybe moving in another position, and make sure that this is done in a timely manner. The privileged access rights section covers the principles to, or the recognition that a privileged access needs a specific set of management processes. As a reminder, privileged access, we're talking about those sensitive, very highly sensitive and highly with a higher level of authorizations access. For instance, again, if I have an administrative account compared to a business user account, probably the administrative account has a higher set of privileges and has to be managed in a specific way. They have to be identified, they have to be assigned, they have to be followed in time, they have to be secured specifically, etc., etc. Logging of user activities, another technology principle here that obviously you need to log all the activity of users on systems when they authenticate, when they access any sort of system, etc. And finally, access recertification. So you may wonder why access recertification here is in purple, is in a different color from the others. That's because it's a different nature, this seventh principle. Let's have a look at the definition in the guidelines. Access rights should be periodically reviewed to ensure that users do not possess excessive privileges and that the access rights are withdrawn when no longer required. So in fact, this is not a security principle or a process that an operational process that has to be put in place. It's a control function that you need to implement. And in fact, it's the only control function that is listed in the guidelines for this logical security part overall. And I find it very interesting because it's not always perceived as the must-have control function in different organizations, in banks, etc. But it is essentially what the guidelines tell us. I think there are a few reasons why this control function has been chosen among all the other possibilities as the one stepstone to really enforce a security control for logical access. The first reason is that access for certification is a very generic safeguard mechanism. So it means that whatever your operational process is, you can implement access certification as a mean to verify that your operational process, I'm referring to account management, for instance, or entitlement management, that they do not cause any kind of risk, or that they do not cause any kind of non-compliance, because access certification works after the fact. It can be therefore implemented within any organization, whatever the size, whatever the systems you are using. If you're using legacy systems, or if you operate in the cloud, basically, whatever the age of the applications and systems you're using, you can implement the access certification process. So it's very adaptable. And finally, the financial institutions are trying to adopt a lines of defense approach to their organization, and access certification actually fits very well this lines of defense paradigm. So if we have a look at the lines of defense, so this is a very simplified view, obviously. Just to explain where access certification can sit on those lines of defense. Here I represented 3 lines of defense. The first line really are the operations, the line managers. Second line of defense, information security, or internal control, etc. And then the third line of defense would be audit, the audit. First line of defense in terms of access certification would be responsible for performing the reviews, so making sure that the user access are reviewed in time and comprehensively, and therefore they are also accountable for their decisions, so for approving or revoking access rights within their teams, within their area of responsibility. The second line, the information security team, for instance, would be responsible for planning and driving the review campaigns. So they are responsible for making sure that the reviews happen, for assigning the work to line managers and reminding them to perform their job and compile all the results. And down the line, once the review campaign is performed, for making sure that whatever has to be remediated is actually remediated, right? So if the line managers decide to revoke some access, then it's really important that those access get revoked in due time. Obviously, the third line of defense, the internal audit team, is here to make sure that this process is effective. So they are checking the reviews. They will ask for a trail of performance of the review, and they are essentially accountable for the sign-off for compliance.
So Cyril, can you highlight some of the best practices regarding the most efficient way to perform access recertification?
Yes, of course, Leanne. There's a lot to say about access recertification, so we'll really I will just highlight a few best practices that we believe are the most important to keep in mind. If you are interested into this topic and want to have a deeper discussion, you can obviously come back to us contact us. But you can also go to a website where you will find replays of webinars dedicated to user access reviews and dedicated to user access review best practices. So this is really a summary, but I will focus on the main points. First point is how to define the scope of the review, what's to be reviewed. And here, remember the first chapter of the guidelines is the proportionality principle. I think it is important to keep in mind that you may choose the scope of your review if it's justified, obviously, and the best way to justify your scope of review is to do a risk analysis, because all accounts, all authorizations do not bear the same risk level, and the risk analysis will help you sort out what really needs to be reviewed and what is more optional. So this could be, for instance, building two sets of accounts and authorizations to be reviewed. The first set would be the highly privileged access, would be the accounts with known anomalies, for instance, anomalies meaning deviations from the three principles we talked earlier: the need to know, least privilege, segregation of duties, access management principles, etc., etc. Or maybe also all the accounts or authorizations that experience a recent or undocumented change. So again, something that would be maybe out of bound or unexpected. On the contrary, second set would be the low sensitivity standard or read-only access, or the access to systems that have a very low priority from a risk perspective. So, for instance, they don't bear any financial records, they don't bear any personal data, etc., etc. And those systems don't require the same level of caution. Obviously, based on this risk analysis, you may decide to have different review strategies in terms of the frequency of the reviews, so more frequent reviews for highly privileged access, for instance, but also maybe splitting the work. For instance, you can perform what we call incremental reviews for standard access. You will want to review at least once a year all the access on all the systems, but maybe to make it less of a burden, you will review 1/4 of the access every quarter, so that eventually after a year you've reviewed everything. Some other principles include choosing well your reviewers, and that's a key aspect to perform successful reviews. The reviewer is accountable. That's really important to remember. He has to make informed decisions about what access is acceptable, what access is unacceptable and has to be revoked, and that's his responsibility. He's accountable for that. Which means that he has to be in a position, in a management position, or at least with a mandate that clearly states his responsibility towards the access review. He has to be knowledgeable. He has to know the people. He has to understand what are the authorizations and what are the risks associated with those authorizations. And he has to be available, because that takes a little time. And although you can definitely save a lot of time by careful planning and maybe dedicated software tools to perform the review, it nonetheless requires the reviewers to be available when the review campaign is started, so that you can meet the deadlines. Second aspect, how to present data to review or to the reviewers. It's very important, and it relates to the previous point. Even a knowledgeable reviewer will have difficulties to perform the review if you're just presenting him columns of technical IDs, for instance. That that make no sense and that require him to go back in the system to, for instance, to understand what's the meaning of such a group ID or permission ID or account ID. So having this prepared data that are presented in a way that they are easily understandable would definitely ease the work of the reviewer and would help making better decisions. The duration of the review has to be aligned with both the effort, so the time it will take on average to each reviewer to perform the review, and the frequency you want to achieve. If you want to perform monthly reviews, or if you want to perform yearly reviews, then basically the duration can be different. Just to illustrate this very simply, there are 4 main steps in a campaign: planning the review campaign, executing the reviews, consolidating all the results, and then performing the remediation process, meaning revoking the access that has to be revoked. And you need a little buffer until the next review. If you don't have this buffer, or if the next review starts before you're finished, I can guarantee that you will never remediate anything, and that basically maybe you'll get your acceptable compliance status as we say in English, you'll get the rubber stamping, right? But you'll never improve your situation, and you'll get very low commitment from reviewers, because they will very rapidly come to realize that what they do has no impact if they ask for revoking an unnecessary or risky access and nothing comes out of the review. So it's really important to make sure that you have enough time to perform all those 4 steps in sequence. The consistency and accuracy principle is very important also when performing user access reviews. Basically, it's an auditing principle. Means that there's a chain of data processing. The access data are coming from the applications in the system. They're coming from Active Directory. They're coming from your financial systems. They're coming from the emailing system, whatever. And they are processed. They are reconciled. They are put down in lists, sent to reviewers. Then they are consolidated again, so that we know what has been reviewed by whom and what were the review decisions. And the consistency and accuracy principle says that you have to make sure that you didn't lose any record along the way. So you reviewed everything that had to be reviewed, and you reviewed everything only once. So it's somehow the data trail along the way. It may be quite a pain to actually be able to demonstrate consistency and accuracy of your access reviews to auditors when you have hundreds and hundreds of reviewers, when you have dozens of systems that need to be reviewed on a very frequent period of time. Finally, keep in mind that one of the main outcomes of the review is not just to be compliant or follow the guidelines. It's really to improve over time the situation in your systems, identifying the risks, fixing those risks or anomalies, improving your compliance posture in a continuous improvement cycle. It is really important to consider that the remediation process is part of the user recertification process. Okay, now I will present you with a very short case study from a Brainwave customer around user access review. This webinar is not intended as a product webinar, so there's no demo. I'm not going to delve into technical considerations. I really want to show illustrate the customer stakes, the customer pains, and how we try to meet those expectations with the Brainwave product. So why undertake a Brainwave project? We're talking about a pretty large financial institution in Europe. They were already performing access recertification for some time with legacy tools. So the first justification for a Brainwave project was to replace those costly homemade tools that were hard to maintain, that were costly to maintain. So to be more efficient and to reduce the operating costs. Also, this tool was covering only a subset of the sensitive systems that had to be reviewed. So they also wanted to improve their overall security posture to and extend the review to those other systems. I mentioned the line of defense paradigm. They also wanted to take the opportunity of this project to align the organization with the line of defense paradigm. Finally, when taking into account the larger system scope, basically it meant processing very large sets of access data involving a lot of managers in the review process and not just a few subject matter experts as it used to be the case. They wanted to have a much more collaborative review process. And obviously they wanted to know at any time who had access to what and how. So the strategy with Brainwave was first to build in Brainwave the inventory of all accesses. So Brainwave essentially is our DNA somehow is that we are masters of data analytics for all access related data. So we help them build this 360-degree view of user access across all the sensitive systems. So what are the users? What are their accounts that they own? What are the authorizations that are assigned to each of those accounts, etc., etc. That's the inventory. Based on this inventory, we design a number of different review campaigns to review user access, so really the permissions assigned to each user account. And depending on the assets, so the systems or application that was reviewed, and the sensitivity of those assets, they have different review strategies. So the frequencies are different, the scope of the reviews are different. In terms of the reviewers, they decided to choose initially the department heads as reviewers, but because the departments are pretty large and this would require a lot of work from a single person, what we implemented is a delegation mechanism so that the department heads can choose to delegate some of the reviews to their subordinates to split the work, basically. So at any time, there may be hundreds of reviewers working on the system on different sets, on different types of access data, etc., etc. And finally, the remediation requests are performed as soon as an individual review is completed. So again, we are the remediation work is performed on a yearly basis, if you like, not just at the end of a campaign. The results of this strategy, basically, as of today, they're performing more than 1,000 reviews per year. I think the latest figures are more like 1,200 reviews per year. They're reviewing more than 150,000 accounts, more than 50,000 access permissions, so permissions to systems and applications, and also unstructured data, for instance, sensitive websites, SharePoint sites, or shared folders, things like that. Which means if you do the combination, means that they are reviewing millions of access rights every year. they are keeping a 2-year rolling history of reviews and access in Brainwave, in the Brainwave inventory, so that they have the full audit trail of who has access to what, who reviewed what was the decision. Essentially, the result is that they had 0 audit finding on logical access for the last 5 years. Teams, I don't know Teams. That's a mistake. Sorry. Why Brainwave? We are the champion software solution for user access reviews, but also, as I said, this is a pretty mature organization. They already had a number of identity management and IGA, identity governance tools in place. They didn't want any responsibility overlap between the operational tools, so the tools which are in charge of account management operations, provisioning accounts, deprovisioning accounts, etc., identity lifecycle, and the tools which are and the teams which are in charge of access controls. And as we said, access certification is a control function. It has to be separated from the operations.
Thank you, Cyril, for that comprehensive presentation on these financial guidelines for Europe. So now I think some of our guests may be saying to themselves, okay, so I know that I need to comply with these guidelines, but really, where should I start?
That's a good question. That would probably require a full webinar. So I'll just give you a few pieces of advice if that means anything. Based on my experience, tomorrow morning, it's interesting that you make sure that you have a clear mandate for logical access compliance. We've seen a number of organizations where people know that those things are important, that someone should do something about it, but it's not clearly identifying the organization. Hence, it's not really well covered. So sometimes the CISO, the security officers are taking those things under their wing, but sometimes it's not their responsibility. It should be someone from the compliance department or else. So it's really important to identify whether those topics are somebody's problem in your organization. And as I remember, access certification is a must-have in this respect. Looking at your access review process, so I'm assuming that everyone is doing some access certification to some extent today. What is the current scope? When do you perform those reviews? Which frequency? Who is involved? How do you perform the review? Is it a manual process? Are they reviewing group identifiers in an Excel spreadsheet? Is it a more sophisticated process? What about the remediation process? Are you sure that every time you perform a review, it triggers a set of technical activities to fix the problems that have been uncovered during the review? That's the most important part, really. Finally, I would strongly suggest that you investigate software solutions for automated reviews, especially obviously the ones we can offer at Brainwave. It would improve your performance and meet your compliance objectives. We provide automated data wrangling, and I can assure you that the preparing the data for an access review is a large part of the effort. It features an integrated campaign management with a workflow engine, with task assignment, delegation, reminders, notifications, escalation, etc. And you can also benefit from the end-to-end review traceability and the review history in the system, so that your auditors are satisfied. So those would be my pieces of advice. Thank you very much for listening. And now it's your turn to talk. If you have questions about this presentation, I'd be delighted to answer them.
So Cyril, you did a great presentation and a lot of talking. So I hope you're ready to help us with some of the questions that we do have coming in. So let me see if I can pick some of the pertinent ones or the ones that kind of.
While
Go
people
ahead,
are submitting your questions, just a couple reminders. So please have a look at our website, brainwave-grc.com. As I mentioned earlier, you'll find other webinar replays about user access reviews, but also compliance controls, automated compliance controls, the inventory of access, as I mentioned, etc. So if you want to be more familiar with our technology, we also have a YouTube channel with all those contents. And you will find the dates of our future webinar sessions, and especially we'll have a webinar session about privilege access governance, so how to enforce the appropriate governance and control over your privilege accounts.
Okay. Well, while you were saying that, I got a few questions in here. So one of the first ones we have is, in your experience, what benefits could I gain by using a tool such as Brainwave for my access recertification process?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the goal really is twofold. One side is be more effective, to save time, be more efficient in the way you perform the review, and the second aspect is improving the overall compliance. Being more effective and efficient, you understand that this is because we are bringing a level of automation and data manipulation that don't have to be performed manually. Improving the compliance is both because automation brings reproducibility, so you do less manual errors, but it is also because from this system you will have a better decision making, basically, especially because within Brainwaves, without getting into technical details, we have a very advanced review interface that highlights problems to reviewers and help them identify and make decisions over those problems in a very convenient way, so that the reviewers both save time, but also the little time they will spend on the review will be well spent on things that actually require a good decision.
Okay, thank you, Cyril, for that. A second one was, what is the minimum scope to review according to the guidelines?
So according to the guidelines, there is no minimum or maximum scope, to be honest. The guidelines don't specify what are the systems that need to be reviewed. This is why my piece of advice is to use a risk analysis to actually perform this this scope definition. But it's not written in the guideline. It's my piece of advice. You do what you want of it. Yes, I believe this is because of the very nature of those guidelines, because in some other regulations or frameworks, the specifications, the requirements are more precise than that. I think it is safe to say that any system that touches sensitive data, either financial data or maybe also personal data because of GDPR compliance, etc., can be a good target, can be a good candidate for access review in general. But again, performing a risk analysis for a risk analysis is probably the best way to come up with the right scope for your organization.
Okay, and I think if you don't mind, Cyril, we have one more way, maybe we can sneak in here. So the question was, we're using many systems and applications that are not centrally managed. Performing access reviews is very time consuming and inefficient. What do you suggest we do?
Yes, so I guess because those systems are not centrally managed, it means that just the gathering of the data that are scattered across different systems is a daunting task. It probably also means that the management processes for those different systems are heterogeneous. You probably don't have a single access management layer. If I infer from the question, let's just say that again, from a control perspective, using a tool such as Brainwave, the level of effort to achieve compliance by implementing a user access review process is mostly focused on data retrieval. So the goal is really to extract the data from all the systems that you need to review, because all the other steps are covered by the software, right? The ingestion, including ingesting diverse data formats and different technologies. So that's not a problem. That's part of the software. Data correlation, filtering, enrichment, presenting the data in a way that is understandable by reviewers, etc. All those latter steps will be implemented in the software, so they will be automated. So, and talking about the data retrieval step, what we've seen in different organizations, and I'll just take an example where there was some stringent security requirements, also, which meant that we were not allowed to directly connect to the systems we had to review. So there was no possibility to have direct connectors to the systems because of firewalls, because of segregated networks, and you name it. So the security principles that separated the different activities. That's not a problem. You can perform a review on a disconnected system if you like, and especially with Brainwave, we can ingest any type of data dump. So an export file of user access and permissions in whatever format that would be ingested in Brainwave. So assuming that transferring a CSV or XML or whatever file from point A to point B can be achieved when no direct connection using an API or something like that is possible. So yes, there are ways to meet your requirements, even in situations where you have a lot of systems to audit, to review, and when those systems are not centrally managed.
Okay, Cyril, thank you. I think we're running out of time here, so thank you very much for all your answers to these questions. For any of you who have submitted questions that we could not get to, we will be answering you directly by email. If any other questions come up in the next days or weeks, please go on our website, brainwavegrc.com, and send them to us, and we will get back to you individually. Again, you will all be receiving a recording by email from us. So thanks again. Thank you, Cyril.
You're welcome. Thank you, Liam. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.